about we do the Pledge of Allegiance? If you would stand with me, please, and let's start off. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, and have a seat. So, the picture that I have up here right now is actually from the F-16 demo team out of Shaw that painted their Block 50 F-16 in this iconic original paint scheme of an F-16 when it was the first prototype. Now the F-16 started off, there was the YF-16 and the YF-17, which were two airplanes that were built as part of a technology demonstration program. They weren't designed to make a fighter jet. They built these two planes and said, let's see how maneuverable we can make an airplane. We're going to keep all this technology to use then when we build future planes. So the YF-16 competed with the YF-17. They went through a competition. The YF-16 ended up winning. The European countries said, we really like this. Let's actually make it into a fighter jet. So 4 European countries got together. The United States says, well, if you do that, we'll buy them also. So the F-16 ended up becoming one of the largest fighter programs that we've ever had in history. Now, the loser of that program, the YF-17, the US Navy looked at it and said, we really like this design. It's got two engines and some other things. They took the YF-17 and created the F-18. So it became also one of the largest fighter programs in history. So two of the largest fighter aircraft programs ever were never designed to be fighter programs from the beginning. But if you ever meet somebody from the Navy, always remind them their F-18 was the loser. Okay? F-16. But what a great paint job and everything. When the F-16 was first designed, it introduced what's called fly-by-wire, which was, instead of having hydraulics and wires and everything that connected it, it was a little force transducer, and literally just measured how much the pilot was pushing, pulling, turning, etc. Originally, it didn't move at all. The stick was just straight. So they had a problem. The very first flight of the F-16 was never supposed to be the first flight of the F-16. What happened is the pilot didn't have any sort of feel for how he was moving the stick, and he started over-controlling the plane. Got the sound. So 1974, this was supposed to be a high-speed...
I started the run. The airplane accelerated very smartly, of course. Pulled the power back, and we had an unfortunate wiring problem in the airplane where the exhaust nozzle would not open up, thus killing thrust. The airplane was very sensitive in roll. It rolled violently left. I countered with an equally violent right command. We were instantly in what's called a pilot-induced oscillation. The airplane rolling back and forth very quickly. It's turning left all this time.
Imagine all the
I could see it was going to go out into the dirt, so I just powered it up and let go of the control, just let it fly away.
The first flight of the F-16 was never designed to be the first flight of the F-16. I imagine all the thousands of engineers looking at that going, no! But that's probably not the word they actually used. But that was kind of interesting to watch it kind of wobble off the runway and go from there. Hey, real quick shout out to all the wonderful folks we have here at Mission Barbecue. Great breakfast. They come and take care of us. Hi, Victoria. She's the only one I see over there. She's hiding in the corner. Diane, you also pointed out, brought some goodies, knickknacks, I don't know what you want to call it. Please help yourselves to these. Is there just the one basket? No, there's a couple. There's 4 of them, all right? So please, thank you, one of our wonderful sponsors, which we'll point out in a minute. All right, my team. We're missing a lot of my team here. If you're part of the executive committee, put your hand up real quick so I don't miss you. We've got Brian, who's also a sponsor. He dual hats. Tony over here. We've got Mike. We've got Ron. We've got Rick. And Josh. Bubba. Ray over here. Fantastic. I'm not even going to try and get all the last names right now, but those folks, thank you all for what you do. You really do make all this work, so thank you so much for being part of the team. All right, we do not have Janina representing the Navy League. She's normally up there doing our greetings and everything for us, as well as singing our national anthem. But Mr. Mary Lamparter, it's always good to have you here with DC3S. Okay, elected officials. that change this week? All right, let me see who I'm going to miss. We got our clerk over here, who's here clerking, looking good clerking back there, Tony. All right, we have from John James' office, okay, Lisa and James. We have Senator Weber. We have Representative Kuhn. Who else we have? Larry Rocca, hiding over here behind Mr. Lamparter. Okay, Mary, you're, all right. I thought you'd left already, because I wouldn't want to sit next to him either. But, oh, there you are, sir, County Commissioner. Thank you much, Don, as always, one of our stalwart ones here. Did I miss any other elected folks? I think we got them all. But thank you all for being here. Thank you for what you do and for your public service. All right, we already talked to my AFA team. Air Operations, American Air Operations came on board as a sponsor. It's been a very great month for sponsorships, by the way, because AEW re-upped with us, so thank you. Steve, I think you're the ambassador today. We don't have Wayne with us. But thank you for AEW coming back on board with us as what we would call a wingman level sponsor. Sawyer Services re-upped is what we call a command pilot. That's the highest level sponsorship, so they're back with us, so that's fantastic. And then Brian also re-upping his, once again, a volunteer on the executive committee with us, but also, oh, and a great videographer, by the way. But also Aero 92 coming back on as a sponsor. So thank you all, that enables so much. We appreciate all of our sponsors, and this is our full list. Thank you, you bet. We didn't forget you, Diana, you're right there. But then, of course, all of our partners. We are part of the Michigan Defense Coalition, which is a total of 5 organizations now. So you have AFA, AUSA, which is our Army equivalent. We have NDIA, which is the National Defense Industrial Association, WID, Women in Defense, and now recently we've also added the National Guard Association of Michigan. We do quarterly events, we do a lot of things, we cooperate together on stuff. I think it's a great role model of what can happen when people actually collaborate and do things in a positive way together. So once again, our sponsors and our partners really make the world go round. All right, normally I get into a real big education thing. Today I just got one slide, one event, November 8th. November 8th, 1950, the first ever jet-to-jet, air-to-air kill. So the Korean War had kicked off. We had at the time our most best fighter jet that we had in the Korean theater was the F-15E. We did not know that Russia had actually moved MiG-15s from Moscow down to China near the Yalu River and was actually flying them. We'd had a couple folks that said, hey, some strange thing flew past me, didn't know what it was. But the MiG-15 at the time was actually a very maneuverable, very capable plane. And the first air-to-air actual combat was a, whoops, what was that? I'll shoot it, from this lieutenant. Sounds like something a lieutenant would do, by the way. But this Russell Brown actually shot it down. Now, the MiG-15 actually performed way better than an F-80, and we learned that very quickly, so our response was to get the new F-86, the Sabre jets that we had, which were mainly in Europe facing the Soviets, and move them over to the Korean theater. And that's where we started the whole thing with MiG Alley, and you had the MiG-15s fighting the F-86s. Something else I was going to say with all that. But that plane on the left right there, that actual picture is the plane that's in the National Museum of the United States Air Force, that F-80. Now, why am I bringing up the National Museum of the United States Air Force? Mark your calendars. Okay, 1 and 2 March. That's a Saturday, Sunday. We are going to do a redo of what we did a couple of years ago. We're going to get a giant luxury tour bus, and we're going to leave from a place to be determined here in Michigan. We're going to take as many folks that want to go, and right now we have 11 cadets from Air Force ROTC at the University of Michigan that are going to go with us. We're going to go down. We're going to go spend half the day in the museum. We're going to go to a hotel overnight, have a little get-together, get up the next morning, spend another half day in the museum, and then we're going to get on the bus and come back. So we're going to have an overnight trip, and if you've never been to the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force, it's absolutely wonderful. It's grown through the years, but think of it as a walk through history. When you walk in, first on the right, this is the original flying. It actually has the propeller that was on the Wright Flyer that broke, that killed Thomas Selfridge. All right, if you don't know, Thomas Selfridge, the namesake of our base right here, was actually the first aviation fatality in history. Also the first military aviation fatality in history. All right, well, you got to die to get a base named after you. So he's actually never been to Selfridge, but that's where Thomas Selfridge, that name comes from. But then you go over and you've got World War II, then you go through the Cold War, Vietnam era, all the way through until you're in the back where it's experimental. The little circular thing right there is the Missile Museum. You could spend many days in there, weeks in there. There are so many cool stories of what happens in understanding our history and where we're coming from. So we're going to have a blast. We're going to learn a lot. 1 and 2 March, mark it on your calendars. More information to come on that. Sir. And yes, they have high-speed wheelie thingies. Man, he was a dangerous driver around that place.
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
Hindsight is 2020.
Hindsight's 2020, all right?
America had a clear engineering performance advantage in aircraft during World War II.
Okay.
I have heard rumors, I'm not a pilot, or a military pilot, but I have heard that MiG was quite an airplane. How did Russia get such a lead on America so soon after World War II?
So what he was saying is we had great engineers in World War II who were able to design airplanes. Actually, when we started World War II, our stuff kind of sucked if you actually look at the planes. We learned quick, we had great engineers, and very quickly we designed, developed, and produced massively superior weapons. His question was, how did all of a sudden Russia come up with this advanced jet fighter that was able to outperform the ones that we had? And actually, compared to the F-86, pretty close on par. Each had a strength and weakness. But your question has a very great one-word answer. And that answer is Germany. Because they took Russia had all the scientists from Germany, and if you look at what Germany have developed, there's a whole section there. I'd love to walk you through the museum. The first air-to-air missile, the first jet-powered, the first rocket-powered fighter jet, first guided bomb, all these things. They're all German. They were all designed, luckily they weren't able to produce these things in quantity at the time, but from ballistic missiles to submarines to aviation, Russia took a lot of their German engineers, brought them into their country and made them work for them, and that's how they were able to all of a sudden have that technological leap where they designed a high-performance, reliable jet fighter aircraft in the MiG-15.
That's also where America got its lead in the space race?
Yes, I mean the space race was all about the V-2, the first ballistic missile, and a lot of those engineers, we took some, Russia took some, but that's how the whole missile race got started. Germany, it's all about Germany.
Smarter, Odie.
That I thought was an impossible task. He said, "You made me smarter, Odie." So I'm not sure about that. I informed you more though. All right, so right now, if you remember, this team that we have in here, best in the country. All right, yay! But at the award ceremony, you'll notice this really good-looking dude with the ponytail right here, okay? Who happens to be with us today, that guy, all right? But I'd like to bring up right now Chris Canada, who is the Vice Chairman of the Board for Field Operations. Now that's a lot to say, but he is a volunteer, he lives in Nebraska, but he is a key player. Field operations, that means he has to put up with people like me. All right, so Chris is here because my understanding is they want to evaluate, they're looking to fire me. So help him out with that, but just to give us a few words, Chris, wonderful that you could finally be here with us. Welcome to Michigan, buddy.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Odie. Actually, I know Odie, he's hoping to get fired from this, but what I was told back, despite the ponytail, I was active duty for 28 years. I'm now rebellious. So I can, for two reasons, I can grow here and I can grow here, both regulatory and biology. But back when I was an evaluator, giving people check rides, once one of my ops officers told me that this individual is kind of shaky, but he has this really yucky temporary duty assignment coming up, and if you take him out, then you have to replace him on that tour. Duly noted. So definitely can't fire Odie, even if I was so compelled to do, because we have to replace him, and Lord knows there's no way we could replace Odie the skill sets, the enthusiasm, the violent positivity that he brings with him. It is hard to replicate and darn near impossible to replace. So, with that though, just want to say thank you. I've wanted, since I got into the position, to have the opportunity to come to one of these, and the planets finally aligned and I was able to do it. But what's really unique about AFA Michigan and how Odie works that, along with even this meeting, and just looking and meeting folks, it is a really nice cross-section of both veterans, people military, community leaders, community supporters, and that's how it should be, because we are our country's air and space forces, and we as AFA, we as communities, recognize that without that, we don't have those superior air and space dominance that we need to defend our nation, protect our allies, and also the military does a lot of humanitarian work to go out and support crisis around the world and help make people's lives better. So as part of your support for our dominant air and space forces, that is just all part of how our nation supports and defends itself, but also supports and defends those who cannot do it for themselves, or at least not nearly as well as we do. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your support of our nation, our Air and Space Forces, as well as our Air and Space Force Association, and that really award-winning greatest of last year, and I'm sure will be for this year too, the AFA Michigan piece of that. So thanks for being here. I'm really looking forward to seeing the presentation today. Enjoy breakfast. Everything's good with bacon. So looking forward to this. And Odie, back to you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to present Chris Zuhlke, Colonel Chris Zuhlke, call sign Tank.
Thank you, Odie, and thank you to everybody for having me here today. It's always a good opportunity to be able to throw a flight suit on and have an excuse to do that, especially now. So as Odie said, I'm not quite yet retired from the Air Force. I will retire on the 31st of May, 2025, after 30 years of commissioned service. So despite my desires, even if I wanted to continue, by law, the Air Force is like, you've done your thing, go and find out something else to do. So, like Peter Pan, I now have to grow up. I grew up in Michigan, just up the road in Imlay City. So I was the beneficiary of Selfridge Air National Guard Base having an impact on me. Grew up in a farming community. My grandfather owned a vegetable farm, and I started working on there when I was 8 years old. But this really cool thing happened as I'm sitting on a tractor, plowing a field, and I would see these airplanes flying over top of me, low level, coming out of Selfridge. And I'd be like, I would much rather be doing that than what I'm doing right now. And that inspired me to what I ended up doing for the rest of my career up to this point. Was fortunate enough to get an appointment to the Air Force Academy, graduated in 1995, and went to pilot training a year later, and was able to select my jet of choice at that time, which was the F-15E Strike Eagle. And it has been my pleasure to fly almost 2,400 hours in the Strike Eagle. I also did 3.5 years over in Australia as an exchange pilot. And so I have just over 500 hours flying the F-18 with the Australian Air Force as well. I'll cover a little bit about the airframe and sort of the development history of the Strike Eagle. I'll go into the systems and what makes it unique. We'll talk about some of the mission sets just to give you a broad overview of what I'm going to then address in the stories. Some of them will be my stories. Some of them will be the stories that I know from others. And then I'll have a couple shameless plugs at the end, which will give you an idea of where I got some of my data from. and then I will, of course, open it up for questions. But let me start by saying, if you have questions in the middle of the brief, please stop me, and I'll certainly answer those as we go. All right, F-15 airframes. So, Odie talked about the F-15A, or A through D. So the air superiority fighter that the Air Force developed as a response to the MiG-29 threat from the Russians. Started flying in 1973, became had initial operating capability in 1975. Primarily a single seat, so single pilot airplane. There were two-seaters made, the B and the D model, to go alongside primarily as trainers. Okay. Odie talked about the F-16 light fighter competition. The Strike Eagle evolved from the multi-role fighter competition that happened sort of in the early 80s. Its primary competitor was the F-16XL, which was a beefed up and enhanced F-16 with the Delta wing. I think there's still one flying from that fighter, from that fly-off. But to kind of segue from Odie's comment earlier, the F-16 lost. So,
Wow. Right.
So from that came the Strike Eagle. Took an F-15D airframe, heavily modified it to then build into what would ultimately become the Strike Eagle. The Strike Eagle became initially operational capable in 1988, which will lead into one of my initial stories, and how quick my community had to grow up because of the world events that surrounded that IOC date to what would come up in the Persian Gulf War I. And now today we have the F-15EX. Couple of things. The airframe really hasn't changed at all from the Strike Eagle. What has changed, or what is changing, is a lot of what's inside. So 30 years of avionics technology improvements, engine technology improvements. The F-15A through E were not fly-by-wire electrical flight controls like what Odie talked about in the F-16. We had a mechanical flight control system that was assisted electronically. But by and large, if the electrics quit on the airplane, you could still fly the Strike Eagle with the old school pulleys and hydraulics to move the flight control surfaces. Not so with the F-15EX. The F-15EX is now completely fly-by-wire, just like the F-16. There's a lot of improvements that go along with that. In the F-15E, if I got a little bit excited and took the stick and put it in my lap, the jet would give me what I wanted, which almost always would end up as an over-G of the airplane. And so I would be sitting the next day, the maintenance guys would be really angry with me, I'd be buying them beer because I over-G'd the airplane and gave them an extra 4, 6, 12 hours of additional work to fix that airplane and get it back on the line. Well, now with the F-15EX, if you get a little bit overexcited and you command that thing to the seat pan, the jet goes, "Hold on, pal, I gotcha." And it then gives you exactly what the airplane is supposed to give you and protects itself from your stupidity.
Yeah.
So
Over-G'ing is turning it harder than it's designed, AKA bending the airplane.
Yep.
The maintenance people hate when you break their jets,
So I'll segue a little bit from there. So the tails of the tape. What is the F-15E? 64 foot long, 43 feet wide. Think of a flying tennis court. You don't realize how large this airplane is until you step up on top of it during your pre-flight, and you have to walk around and make sure that there's no panels open or rivets popped or something like that. But when you stand on top of that airplane, you realize, oh my goodness, this thing is massive. It's the same size as a tennis court. And that is pretty impressive when you think about the capability, the maneuverability, the combat performance that this airplane has to be that size. Fuel capacity, 35,000 pounds of fuel at its max weight, which is basically 2 F-16s worth of fuel. It has 2 engines, so we need that extra fuel to get the length and the longevity of the sorties that we were flying. That's about 5,500 US gallons of fuel burned every sortie. So thank you for the taxpayers for allowing me to do what I've done for $3,000. Max takeoff weight of the airplane is 81,000 pounds. You can actually put more on the airplane than you are allowed to actually take off and taxi with. And so there are many times where we would have to either defuel certain parts of the airplane or reduce the number of external fuel tanks in order to get the weapons that we wanted to carry into combat. Some of that was purely based on the weight of the airplane. Some of that would be based on the performance. So as an example, in Afghanistan, at Bagram Air Base, a very high elevation airplane, in the middle of the summer, we wouldn't get the performance that we needed, so we would have to defuel the airplane in order to take off with the weapons loads that we had, and immediately go up into a tanker airborne, or air orbit, and get fuel so that we could continue with our mission. But it was basically, in that case, a performance-based with the smaller jets the older jets that had smaller engines. There are 2 engines on the F-15E. One is the Pratt & Whitney FW-220s, which were taken from F-16s and put into the Strike Eagle. About 24,000 pounds of thrust each. So you would get roughly 50,000 pounds of thrust out of the airplane. Upgraded engines, the -229s, gave you about an extra 4,000 pounds of thrust each. So about an extra 8,000 pounds of thrust. So 29,500 pounds of thrust in each engine. Giving the jet the capability to reach Mach 2.5 in a fully clean, so not combat configuration. In a combat configuration, the airplane could probably get you to about Mach 1.5, maybe 1.6, before you would have to start jettisoning things off to get faster. Okay, so if you were really in trouble and needed to run away from a threat, you could jettison the external stores and then get the airplane probably up to about Mach 1.9 or so. One of the distinct characteristics of the F-15E that is different from the F-15C is this little bubble right here along the side of the airplane. That is called a conformal fuel tank. Yes, sir?
I just wondered what 5,500 US gallons, what kind of range that gives you, average?
So it's about, gives you a combat radius of about 800 miles, so about 1,600 miles round trip if you are just going out to an area, hanging out for about an hour, and then coming back home. Ferry flight, you could make it about 2,000 miles straight shot. So if we were taking off from Michigan, we could almost get to Nellis in Las Vegas without refueling. Typically, though, we wouldn't do that because you're always going to want to have options to go somewhere if you have an emergency. So we never really push the airplane to those sorts of stress levels, if you will. There's a little switch that's on the stick, just down where your pinky would be. We call it a paddle switch. And if you toggle that paddle switch and then pull the airplane, the jet will give you what you are commanding out of it. So you always have, if you have to recover to avoid hitting the ground, if you have to avoid hitting it or letting a missile hit you, you could paddle off the flight control protections, and the jet will give you what it needs. Okay, max ceiling of 50,000 feet. I've come very, very close to getting to 50,000 feet. I think I got up to 49,982 or 980 feet, and I could not get that last 20 feet out of the airplane on my one attempt to try and get there. The atmosphere is weird up there. You start getting different kind of smells. The pressures on your body are a little bit different, and I think I kind of scared myself a little bit as well, because I was young and stupid and just trying to do it. But I didn't quite get there. And then we talk about the 9G capable airplane. So the airplane is rated to 9Gs, or 9 times the force of gravity. So they call me Tank because, I'm so thin and well physiqued here. But at 9Gs, I now weigh over a ton. And all those forces on my 30-pound brain right here, times 9, now my brain is 250 pounds. And all those forces are now against you. But the airplane itself will fly more than 9. And in the jet, what you get for us is a set of beepers. One is called what we call the low rate beeper, and then the double rate beeper. So that if you're flying the airplane and you command 7 or 8G, and you get into the single rate or the low rate beeper, that's basically telling you you're at 89% of what I should be giving you right now, and you're probably flying the airplane really, really well. If you get to the double rate beeper, you're now at 94% of what I can give you without overtaxing the airplane. And you're really max performing the airplane, so don't do anything stupid and exceed that. If you can stay right here, then you are getting everything that I should be giving you, and you're maneuvering the airplane very well. When you get stupid, because we all do, and you go above that threshold, then you hear the infamous words of Betty that say, over G, over G. And your head immediately goes like this. Your hand goes forward, and you go, crap. Because now I have to go home. Maintenance is going to be mad at me. I've got to write extra paperwork. I'm probably going to go have to see the boss. And I'm probably going to be grounded for a day or two. Just because I got a little overzealous. The most I know of an airplane that I have firsthand knowledge of in the Strike Eagle was someone who pulled 11.9 Gs. It was during a sortie out at Red Flag out in Nellis Air Force Base. A guy on egress. So after the mission was done, he dropped his bombs and was getting ready to go home. He's at low altitude, and all of a sudden he sees one of the adversary F-16s closing in on him. He gets a little overzealous, executes his turn into what we call a brake turn, and goes to 11.9 Gs. And needless to say, he didn't fly the rest of the week for that mistake. Talked about the conformal fuel tanks. What really makes the conformal fuel tank special for the Strike Eagle is not only do they carry an extra 5,500 pounds of fuel each, so that's an additional 10,000 pounds of fuel over what an F-15A or C would have. But the most important thing is that's where the bombs get placed on the airplane. And so that's what really makes the Strike Eagle different from an F-15A through D. The second thing is the airplane is designed to be a two-person airplane. Okay, so up front you have the pilot. In the back we have a weapons system officer. We call them WIZOs. And the jet is optimized to be flown by that crew. Down below you can see the two differences of the cockpits. So up front, the pilot has 3 displays. The 2 up on the top, left and right, are monochrome, so green, green shades. And then the one in the center is a color display. For the WIZO in the back, they have 4 screens. The 2 outside ones are color. The 2 inside ones are the monochrome displays. And now in the EX, these 4 displays are now combined into one massive display that is touch capable and all color. And so far more capable for them in the back to kind of put their displays where they want them to be, to get information more quickly, but then also the entire screen is color, which is a tremendous advantage over what the Strike Eagle has. In the back seat, they have 2 controllers, one on each side, so they kind of sit in the jet like this. And the right controller controls these 2 screens, and the left controller controls those 2 screens. And you put your various systems, your radar, your targeting pod, your defensive systems, all those things on there to get your information. And here's kind of what it looks like. So in the front cockpit, yes.
Hey, how practical are the touch screens in the back screen for the WIZO? I mean, I can't imagine bouncing around trying to hit that spot on.
Yeah, I don't have experience flying with that touch screen, Brian. I'm used to the old school. These buttons are what you push to get the different selections, or some of them are the hands-on throttle and stick, so the HOTAS. You move the different buttons on your throttle or your stick to get the information that you want. But they're now flying with the special gloves that have the touchscreen capable, just like you have on when you wear your winter gloves that are touchscreen capable for your phones. They now have touchscreen capable gloves as well. So this would be a typical setup in an air-to-ground roll for the front cockpit. On the left is my radar display. So radar in the front of the airplane, the nose of the airplane, giving me all of my situational awareness from that sensor. In the center down here is my color display, and this is where I have my situation display. So 360 degrees around me. I'm the airplane, the little blue airplane here in the middle. My formation members are the blue dots, or the blue circles. So I have situational awareness of where my formation members are. If you have friendly aircraft that are not part of your formation, but they're part of the mission with you, they'll be green. And then a red Dorito here is an enemy aircraft. This shows that I have locked that enemy aircraft from my airplane, and that's where the blue line coming out here shows that I've locked him and I'm targeting that person. And then my wingmen here and here have also targeted other airplanes that are potentially hostile to us as well. This is our route of flight that we're planned on. And then if you had a red triangle, that would be the target that we are planning to go against. So a lot of situational awareness, a lot of what we call SA available to us in the cockpit just at a moment's notice. Over here is a display of the targeting pod video. So this display itself has a scud system in the launch position. So it's fully in its launch position, and that is taken from 5.9 miles away, and it's an infrared view. So there's a TV and an infrared option. But the crosshairs, if we then want to designate that target to drop a bomb on it, in most cases the Wizzo would be doing this while I'm doing the air-to-air and formation keeping in the front. And then they would tell me we're designated, and we basically get ourselves to the point of attack, and then we could execute the attack. Up top, night vision goggles. So almost all sorties that we fly at night are flown with night vision goggles to give us the enhanced capability from that perspective. And then these two things, so here's the targeting pod. So this is the pod that's strapped to the jet to give us this capability. And then over here, I didn't really talk about this, but it'll be, I'll kind of cover it in one of the stories. That's the terrain following radar. And what that provides is the airplane can fly at night utilizing the terrain following radar coupled with the autopilot to basically fly at 100 feet at night and maintain its height above the ground using a radar that gets transmitted out in front of the airplanes to see what obstacles are out there, what terrain might be out there, and basically commands the jet to fly along the earth. And that goes down, starts at 1,000 feet and goes all the way down to 100 feet. And you set that in the front cockpit, or you set that in the jet by where you want it to fly. When I first flew our simulators back in the mid-1990s at Seymour Johnson, it was basically a room this size for one cockpit. And in the jet didn't move. You'd climb up into the cockpit, you'd close the canopy, and the only thing you had available to you was what we call the forward-looking infrared, or the FLIR video that projects into the heads-up display of the Strike Eagle. And that was all you had. So you would practice your simulator mission, trying to maneuver the airplane, trying to keep formation, trying to do all the things that we would then go replicate in the daytime. But all you had was this 20-degree heads-up display of true look out the front of the airplane. Fast forward about 15 years, and now we have the 360-degree dome simulators, which have basically 10 28 or HD capable TVs, 360 degrees around you, and everything moves like it should. So when you bank left in the airplane, the whole world shifts. When you look out on the ground at a surface-to-air missile in the simulator that is shooting at you, you get a projected surface-to-air missile that is now flying towards your airplane, and you can maneuver and do all the things visually. So what it's done is completely changed our training mindset. We now do a lot more training in the simulator than we used to. When I started flying the airplane, you would go for basic certification things, and mainly for emergency procedure training. But there were few tactical simulator missions that you would have to go to. Now, we do almost double the simulator training because I can get so much more out of that without ever having to put an hour on an airplane, burning all that fuel. And I, most importantly, can hit pause talk about the decision, or talk about a decision, talk about a mistake, rewind the tape, and do it right then and there all over again. And get many, many more repetitions so that I can build those good habit patterns rather than flying a 2-hour sortie, coming back, and then being able to talk about it once. First, yes, there is a speed limit. You can only go up to 0.96 Mach, which is about 600 miles an hour. If you go faster than that, the radar on the airplane can't keep up fast enough to keep you from hurting yourself. The second part is things like cell phone towers are very radar reflective, and so they actually are good. So the airplane will not normally miss a cell phone tower because it's going to see it a long ways out there. Things like trees may not be as radar reflective, and you could end up having problems. Now let me caveat by saying, we do not train to 100 feet in a normal squadron. The baseline altitude that everyone trains to is 500 feet. Okay, so you have a little bit more buffer there. But there are a number of people trained to both 300 and then 100 feet. Most of them are out at Nellis at the Fighter Weapons School. To maintain a set cadre that if we ever had to quickly get the squadrons spun up to operate at the lower levels, we could do that. But primarily day-to-day training, 500 feet. Real quick on capabilities. So the airplane kept all the inherent qualities of the F-15E through C or A through D. So it can carry up to 8 medium-range air-to-air missiles, up to 4 short-range heat seekers, or any mix of that. So you could carry 4 medium-range and 4 short-range. In a normal air-to-air situation, you would have 6 medium-range missiles and 2 short-range missiles, just as an example. And then always 20 millimeter gun is for the last in the phone booth gunfighting. You get about 5 seconds of trigger of squeeze. So if you pull the trigger, you're getting 100 rounds per second. So you've got about 5 seconds of trigger squeeze before the gun's going to be out. So just a quick burst, you'll get between 70 and 100 rounds. So we would normally practice to about 3 trigger squeezes for an air-to-air engagement or an air-to-ground strafing pass. So you get about 1.5 seconds trigger squeeze, you come off, and you've got probably 2 more. Here's where the money is made in the Strike Eagle. So up top you have your smart weapons. So think your GPS guided weapons. 500 or 2,000 pound weapons here, so 500 pounders, 2,000 pounders, and then a special weapon down here, which is a 250 pounder. And you carry it on basically a sled, and there are 4 munitions on that sled. When you deliver them, they have wings that pop out, and they can fly many, many, many miles. So upwards of 25 to 40 miles, depending on when and how you release them. Laser guided weapons, 5,000 pounder, 2,000 pounders, 2,000 pounders, 500 pounders. You can see the numbers of what the jet is capable of carrying to the left of each of those, not all at the same time. And then your dumb bombs or your gravity weapons. So a 750 pound cluster munition, a 500 pounder, and then a 2,000 pound weapon. Where we're at, here are the operational bases. So there's 2 operational bases in the States. Mountain Home Air Force Base up in Idaho has 2 squadrons. Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in North Carolina has 4 squadrons, but only 2 of them are operational squadrons. The other 2 are training. And then there are 2 operational squadrons over at RAF Lakenheath in the UK. Fast forward to summer of 1990, and Saddam decides that he's going to invade Kuwait. The jet was not yet fully delivered, nor did we have those 2 full squadrons at Seymour Johnson. We had 1 full squadron, and we had about a half of another one. So the 336 Rocketeers were a full squadron operating at their full capability. The 335th Chiefs had about half the squadron, and we're still getting jets delivered to the squadron. And then Saddam decides to invade Kuwait. The wing commander goes into the bar on Friday and says, "Hey, Saddam's done something stupid, but I don't think we're going to go anywhere. So everybody go home for the weekend. Have a good weekend." The next day, everybody's getting called back in, and they had orders to go. So the wing took every airplane that it physically could, and every aircrew that was capable, and took an airplane that had not yet even made itself to full capabilities over to first Oman, and then later into Saudi Arabia at Al-Kharj near Dhahran. The airplane was not yet fully delivered with its systems. So when they first arrived, they didn't have the targeting pod, which was what allows you to do laser-guided weapons. So for the first few missions of the war, the Strike Eagles didn't have the full complement of systems that it needed to execute the level of capability that it could. And then later on, the targeting pods were delivered, and the mission sets started to change, where they were going from just dropping those gravity bombs, those dumb bombs, to then becoming far more accurate and far more lethal with the laser-guided weapons. On the left is night 1 of the Gulf War. So January 17th, 1991, my senior year in high school. I watched this like the rest of you. I think everybody's old enough to remember this. Primarily, the F-15Es were over here in the west doing deliberate targeting on the fixed Scud sites that were pointed towards Saudi Arabia, and more important, to Israel for the political situation. Others were sent out here to the east near Basra, and then a few went up toward Baghdad on night 1. That basically stayed the same throughout the first couple months of the war, and primarily the way the guys describe it in the book that I've read, and talking to several of my instructors who all flew, were this was, you'd fly 2 or 3 missions here, then you'd get moved to the center for a couple of missions, and then you'd get moved to the east for a couple missions, and then you'd get a down day. So you kind of moved clockwise across the country, and then you'd get your down day. And then eventually, they started flying missions over Kuwait itself. And many of you will remember the pictures of the highway of death. And there were many Strike Eagle missions that kind of helped create that mess. Now, some of you may be wondering, why is there a helicopter down in the bottom right of this from Gulf War I?
Chewie!
So there is a very famous story among our community. The first F-15 air-to-air kill was actually against a helicopter, but it was not by a missile. It was actually by a bomb. So Packard 4-1, T.B. Bennett was the front seater, Chewie Bakke was the back seater. They were out in the west doing a normal Scud hunting mission. when the airborne warning and control, the E3, contacted him and said, hey, we have a special operations unit that is about to get overrun, and they need some help. So they got vectored over to the special operations guys, contacted them, and basically the Iraqis had 2 helicopters that were inserting troops to go find our special operations teams. The guys saw the helicopters on the radar, initially tried to lock them up, but were unable to maintain the lock because the helicopters were so low to the ground. And then eventually, when they were able to get them locked and about to shoot, the helicopters landed. So now the radar says, well, they're not moving, so I can't see them, I can't continue to track them. Well, the Wizzo, then Captain Backey says, well, I see him in the targeting pod. So he's got the video of the helicopters, sees the blades rolling, and goes, let's drop a bomb and kill them while they're on the ground. So they do that, they designate, they drop a GBU-10, a 2,000-pound laser-guided bomb. It's in flight, it's about a 30-second or so time of flight. With about 10 seconds to go, the helicopter lifts off. The laser-guided weapon goes basically through the helicopter and then blows up right underneath it. And the helicopter is now 10,000 little pieces and parts of metal and no longer a flying capable airplane. They get back, they don't even know that this has happened until they get back to the unit and they watch their debrief tape, their tape in the debrief when they see that the helicopter had actually taken off. And so it took a long time, but in 1998, they were finally given credit for an air-to-air kill, which became the first air-to-air kill for the F-15E. So a pretty neat story from that. Questions? Sir?
In your opening slide, you had 3 aircraft flying in close formation. It looked like the center one was taking, in the slide, looks like it was taking a hit from a missile. Was it?
No, those are countermeasures. So those are IR countermeasures, or what we call flares.
Okay.
So in the airplane, if you have a heat-seeking missile, whether that's an air-to-air heat seeker or a surface-to-air heat seeker, you can deploy those countermeasures, which provide that hot flare to try and decoy that missile from guiding on the airplane. Okay, throughout the mid-90s, the jet continued to be engaged in combat operations, mainly in Operation Northern Watch, so northern no-fly zone in Iraq, basically protecting the Kurds from the Iraqis, or the southern no-fly zone in southern Iraq, protecting the Shias from the Sunnis, from Saddam's Sunni, primarily Sunni government. Depending on where you were stationed, kind of depended on where you would go. I was at RAF Lakenheath at the time, and our primary deployed area was to Incirlik Air Base in Turkey to support the northern no-fly zone. And if you were at Seymour Johnson, then you usually went to Kuwait, or sorry, not Kuwait, but Qatar, and flew in support of the southern no-fly zone. Operation Deny Flight and Operation Deliberate Forge, were in the Balkans. So back in the Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina wars, we did a lot of, initially a no-fly zone, and then later on actual combat operations against the Bosnian Serbs to protect the Croats. And then 1999, Operation Allied Force. And this is really where young Lieutenant Zuhlke cut his teeth. We flew out of primarily Aviano Air Base in Italy, about 24 jets deployed down there. And then there was also some missions that flew from our home base in England. So I flew about 6 missions from England before I then deployed down to Aviano, where I flew for the next 3 months down there. You can see here our normal kind of mission sets as you would take off out of Aviano. You'd come out here over the Adriatic Sea, and all down the sea here were tanker orbits where you would go get your gas before going into your various areas in Serbia or down to Kosovo during those mission sets. One of my most memorable missions was a bombing raid into Novi Sad, which is the second largest city in Belgrade, and was where their Air Force headquarters, their air defense headquarters was. Our mission that night was to go against a command bunker in or just outside of Novi Sad, and it was a fairly heavily defended area in northern Serbia. When I got out to the airplane, by that time our mission systems had been updated, and we had a digital map in the airplane that you could add threat systems that Intel briefed to us, so that those systems would display on that color display. When I fired up the airplane, the previous guys had a red circle right over top of where my target was. And when I loaded our mission from our little data cartridge, that red circle went away. So the prudent person would say, what's going on here? The missions from the morning had something there that was bad. My mission at night doesn't have that same thing, but I don't know if they went out in the daytime to try and eliminate that threat. So dumb Lieutenant Zuhlke says, not a big deal. Continue on with the mission. Well, Lieutenant Zuhlke should have learned from that. And when we got about 8 miles from the target, my radar warning receiver started yelling at me that I was being targeted. I maneuvered the airplane away from where I thought the threat was supposed to be, or where the system was telling me. And about that time, right underneath me, I see the ground light up like the 4th of July. Huge plume of smoke, bright white light that lights up, and now that coincides with all the bells and whistles in my airplane telling me, you're now the birthday boy. And I watch as a surface-to-air missile 3, a SAM-3, launches from its position and then points right at me. So I go into our defensive maneuvers. My first opportunity is to go down and trade some altitude for airspeed. In this case, as we call altitude is life. So I get the airplane faster so I can become more maneuverable. And I start the cadence of our normally planned counter to this surface-to-air missile 3, which is to get about 4 to 6 seconds of time downward, and then you come back upward to force the missile to try and correct off of your movements, hoping that you can either force it to break lock, so it's no longer targeting you, run it out of airspeed so it can no longer track you, or ultimately create enough miss distance that it will not kill you. So I get to that third option very quickly. About 17 seconds later, I am at the top of what we call a leaf of this defensive maneuver when I see that the missile is close enough to me that I need to do something drastic to force this missile to miss me. And I roll over, I pull about 6.5 G, the missile flies just above the airplane, and I watch as it blows up about 45 feet above my airplane. I can see all the little pretty pieces of titanium rods that are spinning toward my airplane trying to kill me as I then maneuver away and thankfully don't get any battle damage. So now most people would be like, okay, I've had enough for tonight. Let's go home. And my crusty old wizzo who's in the back goes, steering's to the target, you're designated, cleared to release. And I'm like, okay. So we point toward the target, we drop our bomb, 2,000 pounds of hate goes right back into the Serbian ground and blows up the command bunker, and then we go home, and my shorts are a little bit heavier than they were 3 minutes prior. I'll go quickly around the room on the slide, and then I'll get to the next one. So, fairly typical target sets that we had. This is a unique video because we had at the time we had a 2,000-pound weapon that was strapped to a missile body, so we could launch this weapon from like 20 miles away, and it would the aircraft missile or the missile would launch, would fire off, and the bot would carry the bomb an extra little bit. But the unique thing is it had a TV seeker in the front that would get data linked back to the airplane, and so this is about 1 second from hitting that MiG-29 on an airfield where the Wizzo is actually steering the bomb right into the cockpit. So pretty neat weapon. Bridges were one of our primary targets early on in the campaign. You can see here are two. This is a major bridge over the Danube River in Novi Sad, and we dropped those two spans with those AGM-130s. And then Pristina Airfield down here. My second memorable story is actually the day after the ceasefire. So all throughout the war, we tried to go after what is an underground facility at Pristina Airfield, where the Serbs had basically parked all of their MiG-21s. There were 18 MiG-21s that were taken underground into this underground facility here. And we tried throughout the 76 days of the campaign to actually kill the airplanes that were inside that tunnel system. Well, the day after the ceasefire, I was flying combat patrol over top of Pristina Airfield when I watched 18 MiG-21s taxi out to the airfield and take off and fly back north. And the whole time I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, I could become an ace right now. I'd have been court-martialed, but it would have been cool to have been an ace in a day, even though you got court-martialed on that day. But that was a pretty significant memory from that. Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom, 20 plus years of protecting the guys on the ground. First started off working with guys like this. If you have watched the movie 12 Strong, you'll kind of know the story about what's going on here. If you haven't, watch the movie 12 Strong. It's a great movie. And it's all about the first Special Operations Forces that were inserted into northern Afghanistan to help out the Northern Alliance and kind of gain some structure to counter the Taliban in Afghanistan. And the Strike Eagles out of the 391st Fighter Squadron in Idaho worked with these guys here a lot, doing mission sets that were very long in length, very arduous, but an unbelievable thought to think that our guys were riding around on donkeys, dominating targets, and then passing them to the F-16s, the F-15s, and the B-1s to start shaping the first stages of that war. Operation Anaconda, most of you would recognize the term Roberts Ridge. John Chapman earned his Medal of Honor during that mission. There were Strike Eagles overhead. They were the first fighters overhead after Chapman fell out of the helicopter, kind of leading to his mission. First operational strafe of the Strike Eagle in danger close position. So what that means is we had friendly guys within the kill radius of the munition, so of the gun in this case, while the employment was happening. So the enemy was so close that we couldn't maintain our normal safety distance from our friendly guys, and so we had to operate danger close in order to try and save the team that was on the ground. And then May 2nd, 2011, this is a picture of our burn pit hooch. The movie Zero Dark 30 makes these guys famous. I can't confirm or deny which ones were there, but 6 of them flew missions on the night that Osama bin Laden was taken out. So Operation Inherent Resolve, back in April, the Strike Eagle squadrons that were deployed there were part of the two squadrons that ended up protecting Israel when Iran launched over 100 ballistic missiles. The Strike Eagles on that day shot down 76 ballistic missiles on their way to Israel, and this is the final result of that. So the squadron got a phone call from the president right after that mission set, congratulating them on the mission, and talking to them and giving them personal kudos for shooting down those missiles on their way to Israel, potentially escalating what's going on in that AOR right now. And finally, I'll leave you with a shameless plug, or a couple. If you're interested in where I got a lot of my data and firsthand account of what happened in Persian Gulf War I, this book right here called Strike Eagle by Bill Smallwood. Interviewed a lot of the pilots that became my instructors that all flew in Gulf War I. And then second, the 10% True podcast, where a gentleman from the UK invites a lot of people to come out and just kind of give their stories over their careers. And you know, our mantra within the fighter community is any story you tell has to at least be 10% true. So if you get your name, who you were flying with, and the location, you can just make up about anything else. So with that, thank you for your attention. Thanks for giving me the opportunity, and hand it back over to Ed.